or what is a philosopher, is the question we will discuss today. The safest philosophical definition or answer to this question is that there is no universally agreed upon definition of a philosopher. There are as many definitions as philosophers, and even more. Philosophy comes from two Greek words, philos, which means love, and sophia, which means wisdom, literally meaning love of wisdom. So, in this sense, the philosopher or a philosopher is simply the lover of wisdom or a lover of wisdom. And I will tell you at the end the difference between a philosopher and the philosopher. However, that does not tell us much because we must first define what love and wisdom are before we can define the philosopher. Without delving into the details of love and wisdom and relying on their traditional meanings and understandings, the question to ask here is what is the philosopher's way of showing their love of wisdom? The philosopher is someone who exhibits patience with the mind's obsession with simplification and the desire for certainty amidst the inherent uncertainty of knowledge. Unlike a believer who may become impatient with this uncertainty, the philosopher dares to sit with it, refusing to be reduced by the mind's drive for certainty. This willingness to embrace ambiguity and resist surrendering to the need for immediate answers defines the nature of the philosopher. The philosopher, thus, resists surrendering to that to which the believers falls prey. The philosopher surveys the social and, should I say, the sociological mind before speaking to it or about it. While they do so, they also simultaneously survey their own mind. As the French Algerian existentialist philosopher Albert Camus said, an intellectual is someone who is not only the watcher of the world, but also the watched. And here I would like to borrow that to define the philosopher. The difference between an intellectual and a philosopher may be that a philosopher is not necessarily an intellectual, but an intellectual can also be a philosopher. Let me give an example. When Dominique Ede, a Lebanese French intellectual and writer, and who was a close friend of Edward Said, in fact, some say his girlfriend or confidant, when she introduced Edward Said to the Romanian philosopher Emile Cioran in Paris, Cioran said to Ede later, "Oh, so he is an intellectual." Cioran said so probably because if you read his writings, such as The Trouble with Being Born, he spoke from a pit of the darkness of existence. Philosophical pessimism is pervasive in Cioran's writings. The philosopher will be crazy, mad, as I said in one of my previous videos. Mad is being rationally irrational, silly, but defiant, and will refuse to be cut to size for the wrong reasons and the wrong motivations by both state and society. Even in the practice of rational irrationality, the philosopher provides a language to the world that many seek but are unable to have. Cioran, for example, provided in language a unique, dark, pessimistic perspective on the human predicament that few could match. Yes, the philosopher offers in thought or writing, or both, language on some aspect of existence that many may experience but are unable to articulate. The philosopher is never content. Socrates' fans thought he was the wisest man alive because he knew so much. And in fact, he knew everything. But what that meant to Socrates was that he knew how little he knew. And the philosopher knows how little he knows. So the philosopher is humble. The philosopher has regrets. They regret simplifying, reducing, and generalizing. Their urge for complexity is far more greater than the desire for simplicity could ever be. The philosopher has universal aspirations in a world abounding with particular conceptions of good and evil rooted in various forms of humanities, from religion to culture and politics. The philosopher may be carefree and yet important. Socrates never left anything in writing and could not even afford to eat, and yet he is remembered as a philosopher. Good or bad depends on who you talk to. I know this is nothing and probably a joke of a philosophical definition, one that I will regret because I will have missed so much. But as long as there is that recognition, I am sure I am engaging in some form of philosophy. Or maybe I'm not sure. And it's okay to be not sure. Lastly, the philosopher does not need a degree in philosophy to be a philosopher. However, formally trained philosophers will likely be upset because money is involved, even in philosophy, but also more, such as prestige. In a way, I think we are all philosophers because we think about death. Some of us pursue it explicitly and persistently. The philosopher and not a philosopher. Here you should remember the philosopher and not a philosopher then is articulate, explicit, and critical rather than inarticulate, implicit, and pre-critical in their creative and imaginative faculties. Let me read this again. In a way, I think we're all philosophers because we think about death. Some of us pursue it persistently. The philosopher and not a philosopher then is articulate, explicit, and critical rather than inarticulate, implicit, and pre-critical in their creative and imaginative faculties. Other philosophical humans may watch the philosopher in admiration, and yet some others may try to drag the philosopher down. Because as Friedrich Nietzsche said, what I understand by philosopher, a terrible explosive in the presence of which everything is in danger. The philosopher, most of the time, doesn't care about what the world thinks. And the philosopher is needed even if they get on our nerves. Thank you for listening. And I'll see you in my next episode.